When Meghan Markle stepped onto that stage in Washington, the air shifted. She'd arrived expecting admiration, maybe even awe, the kind of response she once commanded effortlessly. But that night, something changed. The lights were flattering, the cameras ready, and yet behind the polite smiles sat an audience that didn't seem to be buying what she was selling. The room wasn't filled with starstruck supporters. It was filled with powerful women used to seeing through polished performances. The moment her name echoed through the hall, laughter slipped through the crowd like a cold draft. It wasn't thunderous or cruel, just quiet, knowing chuckles that carried more sting than any shout. Meghan, still backstage, heard it all. The sound landed like a bruise. That soft laughter wasn't admiration. It was disbelief. When she finally stepped into the spotlight, the smile she wore looked practiced, too careful, almost rehearsed. The evening had been branded as a celebration of power and progress. Yet the irony was impossible to ignore. For years, Meghan had built her image around control, around crafting the perfect narrative of reinvention. But here in this room, she didn't hold the pen. The women watching her were not fans. They were veterans of boardrooms and late-night deadlines, women who'd built empires without royal titles or palace headlines. They weren't impressed by words about empowerment. They wanted authenticity, and Meghan's version of it seemed borrowed. When photographs later surfaced online, the truth was unmistakable. Half-empty seats stretched across the venue, glimmering under soft lighting that tried to disguise absence. The summit's major draws, Vice President Kamala Harris and Selena Gomez, had already come and gone. Meghan had been quietly slotted into an afternoon gap, not the prime slot she might have expected. Even those who attended watched with polite detachment, phones lighting up like small spotlights as attention drifted away. Once she began to speak, the disconnection deepened. She introduced herself as the founder of her new lifestyle venture, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to applause. But there was none. The silence stretched awkward and heavy. The women in the audience, many of whom had weathered bankruptcy, layoffs, and brutal market downturns, seemed unmoved by her polished anecdotes. They'd fought their way to stability, while Meghan spoke about jars of jam and kitchen inspirations as though she'd discovered the essence of entrepreneurship. Eyewitnesses described the moment like a stage play that had lost its rhythm. A few soft smiles flickered, but not out of support, out of courtesy. Every time Meghan reached for relatability, the gap between her words and the audience widened. To them, she wasn't a pioneer. She was an actress in another role, performing sincerity. And then came the moment that shifted the mood completely. With her signature half-laugh, Meghan joked about being in sweatpants while brainstorming her new brand idea, insisting she was just like everyone else. The crowd's reaction wasn't warm. It was restrained amusement, a kind of laugh that said, "We've heard this before." These women didn't see a peer. They saw a celebrity attempting to claim struggles she'd never endured. Behind her, the projection screen glowed with slides of elegant jars and soft lighting, symbols of curated success. But the audience could sense the missing piece. There were no stories of late-night production, no tales of risk or failure, no tangible proof of what she'd built. It all felt like an illusion dressed as inspiration. Meghan spoke of leadership and ownership, yet few could point to a single product on shelves or a single investor's report that showed growth. What made the atmosphere even tenser was the subtle contrast between Meghan's words and the body language of the women listening. Some leaned back, arms crossed. Others whispered to neighbors, sharing small, knowing looks. Every pause stretched longer than the last. The illusion of control, that steady confidence she'd perfected through years of public speaking, began to wobble. Desperate to recapture the crowd, she shifted gears. Her voice softened, her gestures grew smaller. She began talking about independence, how she'd carved her own path outside royal walls. She painted herself as the visionary who turned privacy into purpose, who found freedom through work. It might have landed better if not for the irony that lingered like a shadow. Because everyone there knew, her brand had yet to prove itself. Her empire existed more in headlines than in numbers. The interviewer, sensing the tension, tried to pull things back to friendly territory. Questions about creativity, leadership, balance. It should have been easy ground for Meghan, but each answer felt like a script rehearsed too many times. She smiled through each pause, her charm flickering but never fully catching fire. At one point, she tried humor again. Most people thought I'd go into fashion, she said lightly, but I was really just in my kitchen making jam. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was pitying. You could feel it in the air. Those women weren't mocking her dreams. They were mourning the disconnect between her words and reality. From the back of the room, a few people began to slip out quietly, shoes tapping against marble floors. The sound echoed faintly, like punctuation at the end of a thought. Still, Meghan continued, smiling, trying to hold the moment together. Her tone wavered between optimism and insistence, as if she believed that saying the right words could make the crowd see what she wanted them to see. But the truth was already visible. Behind the glamour, behind the poise, there was a woman trying to remind the world she still mattered. And that night, for perhaps the first time in years, she realized the crowd wasn't hers anymore. The applause that followed was polite, distant, a formality, not admiration. As she walked off stage, the cameras captured that flawless smile. What they didn't catch was the stillness that followed, the way the chatter resumed instantly, as though nothing remarkable had just happened. Somewhere behind those curtains, Meghan Markle stood in silence, listening to the faint hum of an audience already moving on. Backstage, Meghan Markle didn't speak. The hum of conversation from the ballroom seeped through the curtain, muffled and distant, like a reminder of what had just slipped away. Her team surrounded her, whispering damage control plans in low voices. Phones buzzed, messages flew. No one dared to mention the laughter that had started it all. But Meghan didn't need anyone to explain. She'd felt it the moment she walked on stage. That hollow applause had told her everything. Later, the official event recording went online, neatly edited, perfectly trimmed. The awkward introduction, the uncomfortable silence, all gone. The internet only saw a polished version of her speech. But those who had been there knew what really happened. Whispers spread quickly across social media, then across news outlets that hadn't written about her in months. Clips leaked, tweets multiplied, and soon, that one word, laughed, became the headline. For years, Meghan had shaped her image through control. Every post, every photo, every interview was intentional, layered, and curated. But this moment wasn't hers to edit. The truth escaped before she could contain it. In the weeks that followed, even her most loyal defenders struggled to spin the story. They called it a misunderstanding, an out-of-context reaction. But behind closed doors, people who'd worked with her admitted quietly that something about her presentation had fallen flat. It wasn't malice. It was disbelief. Because when Meghan spoke about being a founder, many in that room had seen what a real founder's grind looked like. They'd fought banks, pitched investors, faced failure and payroll panic. They knew the bruises of business. So when Meghan described her jam jars as a symbol of empowerment, it sounded like fiction. Not because they doubted her passion, but because the struggle she described felt rehearsed. It wasn't that the room disliked her. They simply didn't believe her. Still, Meghan did what she always does. She kept smiling. The next day, photos emerged of her leaving her hotel, chin lifted, sunglasses on, as if the night before had never happened. To the cameras, she was untouchable again. But those who saw her up close said otherwise. Her team looked tense, her expression tired, and that practiced sparkle in her eyes had dulled. Just a little. When the Fortune Summit organizers released their recap statement, they mentioned every major speaker by name: Kamala Harris, Selena Gomez, Ariana Huffington, but Meghan Markle appeared only once in passing. No feature photo, no highlighted quote, just a line buried deep in the press release. For someone who once dominated headlines, the silence was deafening. Behind the scenes, her circle scrambled to redirect attention. They leaked stories about her next big project, a lifestyle brand said to be inspired by freedom and creativity. But questions followed, real, pointed ones. What stores were selling her products? Where were the filings, the trademarks, the numbers? None of it seemed to add up. It was the same old narrative wrapped in new packaging, and this time, even the public seemed to sense the pattern. When an interviewer later asked Meghan about her deal with Netflix, her smile faltered just slightly. She called it a wonderful partnership, but insiders whispered that the original contract had quietly expired. The once lucrative deal had been restructured into something smaller, a conditional agreement, not a commitment. Netflix hadn't canceled her. They'd simply stopped waiting. That subtle shift mirrored something deeper. The world had moved on, and she was still trying to play catch-up. Every project, every appearance, seemed to orbit around reclaiming the relevance she once commanded so easily. The royal glamour was gone, and Hollywood no longer treated her like a mystery. It treated her like a brand that had peaked too early. When Meghan spoke that night about financial independence, she chose her words carefully. She didn't mention Prince Harry. She didn't say we. She said I, observers noticed immediately. It was the quiet unveiling of a new chapter, one that didn't include her husband's shadow. Some close to her say that wasn't an accident. She'd been laying the groundwork for her solo identity for months. New partnerships, new team, new direction. Her upcoming book deal reportedly focuses on the female journey of self-redefinition, a soft rebranding designed to separate the Duchess from the marriage. But even that effort had cracks. The more she talked about freedom, the more it sounded like distance. Every mention of independence hinted at isolation. The laughter from that fortune room had been about more than a name. It was about perception. The powerful women there hadn't mocked her for ambition. They'd seen through the illusion of perfection. By the time the event wrapped, Meghan was nowhere to be found at the networking cocktail. Guests mingled, exchanged cards, and discussed panels. Her name came up briefly, followed by awkward silence. One attendee told a journalist later, "It felt like watching someone audition for credibility." Another added, "She was performing success, not living it." Those words spread quietly but carried weight. When the night ended, Meghan exited through a side door, skipping interviews, skipping the crowd. Cameras caught her car pulling away under the city lights. Inside, she sat still, scrolling through her phone, already seeing the headlines forming. But this time there was no way to rewrite what had happened. The event that was meant to mark her comeback had instead revealed something raw: how fragile public admiration can be once it starts to fade. Days later, tabloids called it a small stumble, but those who understood image management knew better. This wasn't a stumble. It was exposure. A moment that peeled back the polish and revealed the woman underneath. Ambitious, talented, determined, but unsure where her story goes next. Still, if there's one constant in Meghan Markle's journey, it's her ability to rebuild from chaos. Every time the narrative turns against her, she reshapes it. Every time silence surrounds her, she finds a way to turn it into sound. And maybe, deep down, she knows this moment isn't the end. It's a reset. Because for someone like Meghan, who has lived half her life in front of cameras, silence isn't defeat. It's preparation. Somewhere behind that calm smile, she's already planning the next move, the next speech, the next reinvention. And when the world least expects it, she'll step back into the light again, still composed, still confident, and still determined to prove that no matter how many times the room stops clapping, she can always find another stage. Always find another stage.